Hi, everybody. I'm Bethany Powers, and I work with a group called Associated Employers, and we are a not-for-profit, and we do HR for small businesses that can't afford HR. So we work with a lot of not-for-profits with that. And we also do trainings all over the state for public and private companies and things like this that I'm doing with you guys today. I was just in Helena doing anti-harassment training for a group. So we do lots of different trainings around the state, but I'm really happy to be with you guys here today. So let me get my screen shared and we will get going. All right. Can you see my navigating workforce screen there?
We do not.
Okay, let me try one more. How about that one?
Now we see it. There we go.
All right. So depending on your workplace, you might have 4 or 5 different generations working in your workplace right now. And that is a situation that we have not found ourselves in before. It is a unique situation. It will only continue to change as more Gen Z welcome into our workplace. So we're looking at some differences in how we've done things and how we will do things moving forward. We're going to talk today about who's in the workforce right now, what the traditional definitions of the generations are, some perceptions that we may have about generations and some stereotypes that exist. And we're going to talk about ways to overcome stereotypes because that's really important when we're dealing with this issue. We're going to talk about changing the way we do business. Things that we've done in the past are absolutely not going to work moving forward. So a lot of change has happened, from COVID, and in the before times of COVID, things were a little different. We got shoved into remote work before a lot of companies were making that happen. And we made some huge changes out of necessity. But there are still some changes that we're going to need to make as we move forward. And we're also going to talk about the advantages that we have with this generational diversity, because there are some huge advantages to having all of that experience, all of that sometimes institutional knowledge, and just all of that life experience together. So it's a wonderful thing to have if we're taking advantage of it properly and we see it as an advantage instead of as something we have to overcome. So a generation, for our purposes, a group of people who are living at the same time, relatively the same age. They've experienced those same events within the same time frame. Like I am a Gen Xer, and a lot of us, if you say, what's the first thing that you remember that happened politically? Well, I was a little girl when Nixon resigned. So that's really the first political event I remember happening. And if you were to ask my mom, there was a war, the Kennedy assassination in her timeline. So there are things that we've all experienced together, may have affected us differently, may have had, different effects on our communities, or may really have not had an effect, but we remember those things happening. Then there are influences that are going on during the same time frame. For the generation that's in elementary, junior high school, and high school today that had that experience of COVID through school, that's going to be something that remains with them and forms their outlook on a lot of things as we move forward. So that's going to be, if you're going to ask them what's first thing they remember politically or happening in the world, COVID's probably going to be a big deal for them to remember and to talk about. So I do have some activities where I'll ask you to pitch in. So I'll ask you to either go through the chat, which I can pull the chat up on for myself here. Let me get the chat up here. So if you want to chat in some things, that's fine. If you want to come off your microphone and unmute and yell out something, that's okay too. What we're going to talk about in this first activity is what are some perceptions you have about different generations. So if I say the word boomer, what kind of perceptions do we have about boomers? So boomers are inflexible. And believe me, we're going to be equal opportunity talking about every generation because we're all not perfect. Boomers are hardworking. Okay. If you're younger, some millennials and Gen Z, the word boomers kind of has a negative connotation to it. Like millennial has a negative connotation to some other generations. All right. Well, thanks for the two. Stubborn. Yep. Yep. Older, mostly retired. Well, there's a lot of them that are retired. There's also still quite a bit of them that are in the workplace today. So what if I say Gen Z, the younger kids? What are we thinking of when we're thinking of the new college graduates that are coming into the workplace? Entitled, okay. Flighty, technology oriented, absolutely. Attached to social media. What about that millennial group? Energetic. So we think of millennials, and remember that the elder millennials are in their early 40s at this point in time. So Emily, yes, as a millennial, you are awesome. All right, so let's go beyond boomers into traditionalists. So the generation that's before boomers. What might some perceptions of that generation be? More conservative, yeah. Hardworking, absolutely. Yes, they're still alive. Back when, yes. When we're talking about that traditionalist generation, my mom is 82, and there are, you know, those folks that are in that age range and a little older. Yeah. Save everything. Yep. They absolutely, they have seen a lot. My gosh. Think of all the change, you know, I'm Gen X. Think of all the changes in technology that I've seen. Think about somebody that's, you know, in their late 70s, early 80s. My gosh. So then Gen X, my generation, when you think about Gen X, what do you think? Oh, that's perfect. We're the forgotten generation. Normal. Well, yeah. Hardworking, but more flexible. Yeah. Latchkey kids, you betcha. The joke is give us a bobby pin, a lighter, and a couple of hot pockets, and we can survive for a few days on our own. We're the kicked out in the yard generation. Absolutely capable. Good way to put it. Now, the reason we talk about this is if you scroll up through here, you're going to see some stereotypes of some things and some ways of thinking about generations that we're thinking about perceptions we may have heard. What are our own personal observations of things? And that's what we're going to talk about when we start talking about that perception stereotype piece. So we've kind of got an idea of what we're talking about, maybe from our perception of different generations. So if we're looking at our workplace today, that traditionalist generation, that's 1925, 1945 down there at the bottom, only about 3 million of them are still in the workplace. But that's a lot of folks, I think, out of that age to still be in the workplace. Bless their hearts. Then you've got your boomers, 46 to 64, 25% in the workplace. We've got Gen X, 65 to 1980, 33% of the workforce. Millennials, born 81 to 96, 35% of the workforce. And Gen Z, 1997 2012 with 5% of the workforce. The kids that are being born now, I think they're, I heard the other day they call them Gen Zero or Gen 1, something like that. I don't know what they'll end up being called, but they haven't really designated them with a label yet. But if you look at that group of boomers, 25% in the workforce, it's still a quarter of the workforce, still quite a few people. We did see a lot of boomers retire during COVID. If they were able to retire financially, a lot of folks just went ahead and said, you know what, that's the time to do it. COVID is telling us now's the time. So we did see quite a few people move out of the workforce through retirement in that boomer age range. Now, Gen X is a smaller generation than all of these that are listed. It's actually the smallest generation. The folks who were born in the baby boom did not turn around and have another baby boom. They had less kids. So Generation X is a smaller generation. And you see millennials at the largest group in the workforce, and the millennials are a larger generation. The boomers are always going to be the biggest generation we've had so far, but millennials, there are time and a half more millennials than there are Gen X. So Gen X had more kids than their parents did. And then we have Gen Z, which Gen X is still parents of Gen Z, some parents of millennials, but parents of Gen Z that are coming through. And Gen X has the issue of dealing with aging parents, folks are living longer, and dealing with younger kids. Gen X had children later, and we'll see that happening with millennials too, that millennials had children a little later than boomers had kids. So we'll see that happening with them too. You got your aging parents to take care of and kids to take care of. That stress in the workplace that we talk about is elevated for generations that are having to deal with that. But this is what we're looking like as we're moving along. This is what we're looking like in the workforce today. Why is the span for boomers 18 years, but it's 15 years for other generations? I think it had something to do with the war. I am not 100% sure on that, but I think that's why there's a different span there. And that depending on who you look at for that range, different companies use different range. I use Pew and Gallup for most of the research that I do on this sort of thing. So that's how they describe it, but you can find other definitions for that length of time. Then our workforce in 2030, here's what we're expecting to happen. So boomers are aging out of the workforce. They are also, I think it's 10,000 boomers turn 65 every day. And that's going to happen through 2030. So that is going to be a generation that over the next several years is just going to continue to retire. So we see Gen Z pulling up there, taking over more of the workforce. Millennials are still going to be in that larger workforce range. Our Gen X, just a small generation. So we can't cover the gap between what boomers leave and what millennials and Gen Z can pick up. So we're going to have an experience gap that happens if boomers continue to retire more rapidly. So we really, whatever our work is, whatever our company's doing, getting millennials more involved in mentoring and cross-training and identifying people who are capable and looking to move up in our workplace. It's really going to be more important than ever to build our bench as we move forward, because Gen X is not going to be able to fill all of those experience gaps. The younger generations are going to be taking over the workplace. By 2030, the majority of the workplace is going to be under 50. That's a lot of folks and a younger workforce. So let's talk about these different generations for a minute. So our traditionalists, which are mostly out of the workforce, this is that greatest generation. This is the generation that fought World War II. This is those folks. So they have a respect for authority, hierarchy, rules, actually looking for those sorts of things. Very hard workers, incredibly dedicated and loyal. A generation of sacrifice in so many ways. A lot of these folks were children during all of the terrible things that happened in the 20s to the United States financially. So they grew up having to be very thrifty, having to save. When we're talking about older folks save everything, it comes from a really natural place. And we do have to remember that when we're thinking about generations, is every generation, I believe, is trying to do better than the generation before. You know, we're trying to be different parents and hopefully better parents. We're trying to be, you know, in younger generations, especially better employers, better stewards of the planet, trying to improve on those things. And we see it happening generation to generation. And that's the progression of things and how things move along. And it's also the reactions to the things that didn't work, or the reactions to the things that we found out we shouldn't have been doing or were damaging. So every generation takes that on a little differently. So in this generation, really striving for companies to succeed, really striving to have a place in the world, really striving to have some backup for themselves, you know, having savings, having retirement, those sorts of things. They grew up as children through a time of nothing. People were making dresses out of flour sacks and things like that. So it makes sense why they saw work this way and why their values were aligned this way. These were folks that worked before they had any fun, and sometimes they just worked. Tradition was always valued, and work office-based if you were an office worker, but no such thing as remote work in this kind of world. And then we have our baby boomers. So boomers, 1945, 1965, huge changes in the world and society. My mom and her sister are a perfect example for me of how boomers can be different. My mom, very, very straight-laced, very proper Southern lady. Her sister, 2 years younger, complete hippie, was at Woodstock, you know, hitchhiked to Kent State, all the completely different ways of growing up, but both of them boomers. Their priority in work still that priority, like traditionalists, still looking at work to be the thing you do first. A more optimistic generation for sure than their parents, looking for some personal fulfillment from work. Really one of the first generations that was, you know, this should make me happy too, if I'm going to spend this much time here. Looking to compete. You know, if your parents were the greatest generation and they saved the world, how do we compete with that? Well, boomers took that and said, let's make a ton of money. And that's what happened. Looking to professionally network. There is value in the meaning of what we do and the work that we do. And still a more office-based generation. This is also the generation that pushed social change in so many ways. This was the generation of hippies and free love and changing the course of politics through this, seeing war in a different way than the generation before it saw war. So a lot of changes and upheaval through this boomer lifespan too. But we have a lot of the social change that we have today because boomers were the first people fighting that particular fight. Then we've got Gen X, our forgotten generation. One of the major news groups did a 3-night deal on different generations and what was happening in the country at different times. And they did not include Gen X. So we are definitely the forgotten generation. But there are some things that happened during our time span that the Soviet Union fell, personal computers were invented, MTV came along. I remember in high school sitting in front of the TV on that day that MTV started and watching one video and then watching the little Moon Man for like 10 minutes and then watching another video. It grew rapidly, but that's what it started out as. So there were a lot of things that happened, through our generation and are still happening through our generation. So work style, definitely more self-reliant. This is the generation where the term micromanaging comes from, because we did not want to be micromanaged. Flexibility desired in work. A lot of things going on in your personal life. So being able to work from home some is great. Being able to, work 4 10-hour days in a week and have Friday off is great. Some sort of flexibility is really helpful for this group. Heavy skeptics, the people that in a group when we're talking about trying something new, these are going to be the folks that are well, did you think of this? And did you think of the effect it's going to have on these people? And who thought of how that's going to work logistically? Skeptics. Technology, most of your Gen X folks are very comfortable with technology. We were the Commodore 64 generation, the first one that came out, and have seen it change rapidly. So most Gen X, tech savvy, fine with using it. Some folks have decided that, the last smartphone they buy is the last one they're going to buy because they're tired of the constant change of all of it. But a generation that grew up with it. If you were, let's see, when I was in the Commodore 64 came when I was in high school. And then by the time I was out of college, the first laptops had come along, things like that. So it advanced as rapidly then as what we're seeing now. A more informal group, definitely. Boomers, pretty formal. Traditionalists, very formal. So we can see that wearing down, that formality wearing down generation to generation. Have a real interest and very much value work and life balance. Not the generation that's thinking of work first, but thinking of life first and how does work contribute to it. And then, like both, remote work is great. If I could not be in the office some, fantastic. Fine with it either way. Then we go into our millennial group. Gen Y was the original designation. Fast-paced group, multitasking, multimedia, several things going on at once. Just remember that with multitasking, you still can only do one thing at a time. The thing that you're doing is the one you're doing. You may have a lot of tabs open. You may have a lot of things going on, but we're still working on one thing at a time. First generation really to come into the workplace and say, here's how it is. Pretty direct, tenacious, want information and want answers. Nothing wrong with that. This comes from how you've been raised. My growing up, kids were still, I was allowed to speak up, but not all the time. Looking at my kids, my friends' kids, we allowed our kids to ask a lot of questions and talk a lot and be present in the moment. I went to pick my nephews up. My brother's older than I am. So I went to pick my nephews up at school and, they were sitting in a little circle in their classroom. No chairs. The chairs were all stacked up against the side, no desks, none of that sort of thing. That's how they worked most days. Such a huge departure from when I was in school and we were sitting in desks in little rows. We raise kids differently now than we did before. And again, it's a response to wanting to do better for them. So we bring a generation up to ask questions. When they get to the workplace, they're going to ask questions. They're not necessarily beating around the bush to ask their questions either. They're just asking it. Older generations see that as a challenge to their authority or to their integrity or to their competence. And that's not at all what's happening. Younger generations are asking questions because they want to know. They want to know how things work. They want to know why it works that way. Generations past, it didn't really matter. You just did it because that's how we do it. Younger generations were brought up to challenge, so they do. And we have to respect where that's coming from. And answering whys is going to be part of your life. If you don't like it, you better get to like it, because with our younger generations coming in, that is not going to stop. They are going to continue to ask questions. An entrepreneurial generation, we've seen a lot of that, the startup generation. Global diversity in things. The internet brought the world to your bedroom, your living room, your hand, if on your phone. We are more connected and know more about what's happening in the world than ever before. If you talk to some younger people who've consistently used social media and chat, things like that, it's likely that there's somebody in their group that's in another country that they've never met face to face, but they're still connected. This is a tech savvy group, and they are expecting the workplace to be tech savvy. If you're 15 years behind on tech in a workplace today, millennials and Gen Z are looking somewhere else. The government groups are the only ones really who can get away with that with the younger generations, because we kind of understand that the government's a little behind. Then fun is valued. In a lot of instances, this generation is working to have fun. It's paying for the adventures in life, which I love. When I was working in national parks, we had folks who would come and work in Yosemite for the summer, wait tables. You don't have to spend a lot of money when you do that. Housing's provided for you, you get fed, you can adventure around in the park, but you can also save a lot of money. Then they would spend, 3 months of the winter in Thailand, or, bouncing around in South America, something like that, having these awesome, amazing life experiences. And I was so jealous. Like, where was that when I was that age? That sort of stuff didn't exist. I was mad, but I thrilled for them that they could do that sort of thing. And flex work for millennials and Gen Z, if you're not offering some sort of flexibility in where you work, that's going to be a handicap for you. If there's a good reason why that exists, then, and that's the job that they're looking for, okay. But if there's not a good reason why that exists, and it shouldn't have to be a part of the job that they're looking for, you just prefer people to be in the office, they're going to look somewhere else to work. Then we've got our Gen Z folks. So looking for cash, looking for job security, looking for instant feedback, satisfaction for things. Your answers have been in your hand your whole life if you're Gen Z. The computer has been around forever. I remember Encyclopedia Britannica. It cracks me up to think that I used to go to a book by letter and look up something when I just, ask Siri or Google it now. And both my phones, Siri just came on. But that's how different life is now, and how differently things look for these kids, because it's right there for you all the time. They are looking for mentoring, looking for people to help them through in the workplace, looking for those outside opinions on things, looking for help and opinions. This generation is less independent thinking than millennial generation is. This generation is saying, okay, we want to have jobs, we want to have some stability, mentoring will help us get there. This is a competitive group of folks, and they are looking for advancement in the workplace. They do want a simplified workplace, which means that whole hierarchy experience that workplaces have had, that whole, you go to your direct supervisor, you never go above your direct supervisor. If you need something, you only go to your supervisor. They want to know who orders the pens, because when they run out of pens, they want to go ask that person for pens. They want to know who makes financial decisions, because if there's something that they need to do that's going to involve that, they want to talk to the person who makes the decision. They're not wrong about that. It's just a different way the business has worked before. They are tech savvy, and they are expecting that in the workplace. And again, just like the generation before, looking for that flex work. Gotta have it. Then we have what we call cuspers. So people that are born 3 to 5 years, and they can overlap 1 or 2 generations. Share characteristics, relate well to both overlapping generations. So my brother and I are 8 years apart. He is definitely a boomer. and the ways that he does things, the way that he sees things, and I can understand that. I raised in a household by boomers. I get it. I definitely fit more into the Gen X span than he does, even though he's fairly close to it. Pretty foreign for him. Doesn't see himself as tech savvy at all. Very traditional about how he thinks about things, very conservative and how he thinks about things. I am not. We differ on a lot of things, but raised in the same household and affected by a lot of the same things growing up. But there is that difference in when he was in school and when I was in school. We're just enough apart in age that there are some pretty major differences in how we see the world and how we look at things. People who raise you, where you were raised, the kind of schools you went to, churches, those sorts of things all have an effect on the filters that you see life through. But when you were born and the things that were happening in the world and around you also have that effect on you. So somebody can be born, into the tail end of the boomer generation, but absolutely relate more to Gen X because that feels like more of their experience. So if you're in that cusp, I think you're kind of lucky because you can really understand the generation before you. If you're on the front end of one generation, your kids are on the tail end of the next one, you're going to be pretty far apart in how you see things. So let's talk about perceptions about generations. So perceptions, our own observations, what we've heard from others. Talking about your perceptions is important because if you talk about your perceptions, you might change what you're thinking. Perception is choice. And when we're confronted with fact that's different than our perception, we have to be open to replacing that perception with that new fact. And that's one of the things that we see happening today is that there's this feeling that what you think and what you feel might be more important than what the actual fact is. And we have to remember that facts rule. So if you've thought something about a generation or a group of people and you're confronted with someone from that generation that absolutely is completely different than that, replace your perception of that generation. Look at people as individuals. That's going to be one of the biggest things about replacing some of our perceptions with some facts. Yep, we've heard all kinds of things about participation trophies and all this sort of stuff. The kids didn't ask for the participation trophies. And the kids didn't ask to be raised in a more entitled way. That's their parents' fault. So if you want to get mad at somebody, get mad at the generation that was raising them. It's not their fault that that's what they grew up with. And in my working with all different generations in national parks, things like that, the entitled piece of millennials and Gen Z, I didn't see it. So I'm not sure where that's come from folks. And if it's something that you've actually observed, then absolutely you're seeing that, but not something that I've observed in all the years of working with younger folks. So you got to deal with the person that's in front of you. If you're dealing with somebody that fits into that Gen Z or millennial range, yep, okay, they're Gen Z or millennial, but who are they? So when we start doing that, we start thinking about our perceptions that way, this is how we can avoid stereotyping folks. Because absolutely not all boomers are stuck in their ways, work comes first. Absolutely not. My mother and her sister are the perfect example of that. Two boomers, two radically different ways of seeing the world, and born only 2 years apart. So you absolutely can avoid stereotypes in this. Challenge your own assumptions. When you see something that's happening that completely goes against what you thought a generation might be about, change that for yourself. And avoid things that lump everybody together. We do that through this entire presentation, but you have to remember that everybody is individual. Everybody's unique. Make statements based on your observations. So if you have an observation, you generalize, you get a stereotype. If you have an observation, it's about a unique person. We're talking about that person. All millennials are not going to behave in a particular way. All Gen Z is not going to behave in a particular way. All of boomers are not going to behave in a particular way. So we have to remember that we're dealing with a person. Do the generational aspects have some real life meanings? Yes. But we have to deal with the person that's in front of us, as well as what we think might be going on generationally there. So this is it's a more complicated thing than just saying, if you're dealing with a millennial, do this, or if you're dealing with a Gen Z, do this, because you're dealing with an individual person as well. So let's talk a little bit about how our workplace has changed because of different generations. So in the past, when we were making decisions in the workplace, the people in the C-suite, the people in the corner offices and the ivory towers, they're the ones that made the decisions. And we were handed down those decisions and we implemented them. That hierarchy, that chain of command, that's how decisions were made. Now we talk to people. We will do Survey Monkey and ask people how they feel about something. We'll look at what's happening with the situation. Talk to people who are being affected by the situation. Bring experts in. We'll have people come in from the outside and consult with us. We make decisions in a completely different way in the workplace than we did, 20 years ago. It is a very, very different world. And it's wonderful because we make better decisions now because we're bringing more people into the process. So location and proximity of work. The before times for all of us, which is what I call the time before COVID, the before times, you worked where you worked. Most people had an office. There may have been some flex work that was happening, and we did have some remote workers, but for the most part, people were working in the building that their company resided. That's where you were working. Well, since COVID hit, and all of the things that happened to us very quickly with COVID, we found out there are a lot of jobs that don't actually need to be within the confines of our business building. We do have management struggling with that, and we do have CEOs that are really pushing to bring people back into the workplace. You know, and I wonder how many of those CEOs actually spend all of their time in their office and how much time they might spend working at a cabin on the lake during the summer. I would imagine it's a little higher than what they would want to talk about. But technology does allow you to work from nearly anywhere. You can get a Wi-Fi signal. You can work from anywhere. I have a friend right now that she's an editor. She does not have to be in office space with anyone. She is working in Spain for the next month because she can afford to travel, and she's going to work in Spain for a month. Bless her heart. But that's the kind of thing that technology will let you do. It was not very long ago that a company would not have been okay with you being out of the country to do your work. But with her work, it really doesn't matter where she is. And the company that she edits for gets that. We have completely changed this. And for a lot of us, this changed 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago. And we're still struggling with it sometimes. But I think for the most part, we've got it down pretty good. And then how information is given out in a company. So back in the day, you knew what your job description needed to know. That's what you knew. If it wasn't directly related to your work, then you did not know. You may not know how your company's doing. You may never have seen a balance sheet. You may never have been talked to about how other departments within the company are doing. You just knew what you needed to know to do your work. Well, now we have that beautiful word transparency, where we want to share with employees how things are going. We want to talk to them about the health of the company. We want to talk to them about the growth that we're expecting to have. We want to do those things. If things are not going well, we want to tell them, you know, here's what's happening with us. If we're looking at layoffs down the road because of something, you know, we don't spring that on people. We say, you know, we may be looking for voluntary furloughs in the next 6 months if things don't improve from this. Transparency in the workplace has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 10 years. We have transparency in pay for organizations. NLRB said you can't keep employees from talking about their pay. It used to be that I worked for the Limited Incorporated for 18 years. It was against company policy to talk about your pay, and you were terminated if you did. No questions asked. If they found out people were discussing pay, those people got fired. That's not the way it works any longer. And that's a good thing. It helps us with our pay equity. It also helps us understand as a company if we're behind other companies doing the same sorts of things. There's so much good that comes from that. And again, this helps us with our decision-making process as well. So we share with people what we know. That helps us because who knows what's going to come up, who's going to come up with the next great thing. Everything we do in our work, somebody thought of. And if we're transparent and we give information to people, who knows what somebody else will think of to help. Then we've got that motivation piece. What brings you to work every day? What is the thing that motivates you to do the work that you do? I want you guys to chime in on chat and tell me something that motivates you to come to work. Coworkers, team members, job stability. Yeah, all of those things matter. In the HR world, we're constantly surveying people to find out, you know, what their motivation is for work. And the top 3 are always culture, my boss, my pay. It's really rare that pay is the first thing, because most folks would take a little less pay to work at a terrific place and work for somebody terrific. It's really rare that you leave a job that you feel valued in, that your work is appreciated for $1 more somewhere else. because you don't know what that dollar more is going to do to your life. So paychecks are a motivator, but they've never really been the number one motivator. And we're looking today at lots of different motivators for being at work. Culture right now is huge. Younger folks are looking at a workplace, and if it stinks to be there, they're not going to be there. A place that's just competitive with nothing else behind it, then why am I doing that? Why would I do that to myself? So people are looking for good reasons to work at the place they work. You like the government bureaucracy? Sometimes in bureaucracy, there are ways to do things, and there are guide rails for things and policies. And, sometimes that can be pretty comfortable. I work with NRCS quite a bit, and they're inundated right now because this new plan has come through for all this money in the Farm Bill. And they're all freaking out because they have to hire a bunch of employees. We've got all these things going on. And, it is what it is. The government's a big ship, and it turns slowly if it does. But hopefully the people that you work with are good bureaucracy people, and you enjoy that. Then we have our management. How do we manage people? Management used to be, I tell you what to do and you do it. That's what management used to be. We had chain of command. You could be intimidated in your job. You could be bullied in your job by your boss. All of those things could be happening for you. Now, if you behave that way, managing others, they are not going to work for you very long. And that can be something that ends your employment. Employers are looking for managers that keep people, and managers who manage with intimidation do not keep people. So we're seeing managers now that ask questions, they're asking for input, we're looking for collaboration within our team. We care about our team. Mental health is a real thing happening in the workplace right now. It always has been. It's just more upfront for everybody right now. And it's become a talking point. And I, for one, am happy for that, because that old idea of leave what's going on at home at the door when you come to work is interesting to say, but super hard to do depending on what's going on in your life. And that's another thing that COVID did for us, was push that idea into the workplace even harder. We got to care about our folks. Your manager has to care about you. They don't have to be your priest or your rabbi or your nurse or your doctor, any of those things, but they've got to care. And if you need time away for something, if something terrible is happening in your life, you need to be able to trust that you can talk to them and get some time and have some help in straightening things out. Managers today, it's not quick to fire. It should be quick to have a conversation, find out what's going on. We've changed how we're looking at that. Much better workplaces than we had when I started working. When I started working, we were under that, chain of command situation, and it wasn't anything in a good guardrails kind of way. It was, if your boss was the problem, you could never go around him. He's just always going to be your problem. We don't have those sorts of rules anymore. So much better. Then our recruitment and retention piece. I remember the good old days of ad in the newspaper. That seems so quaint now. Now we have to sell our company. Our job posting has to give people reasons why they should come and work for us. We got to sell ourselves. People can find jobs. So how are we making ourselves stand out? And where do you advertise for the job? How are you attracting the folks to you? We've learned about keywords. We've learned about keyword searches. We're learning now how some automation can help us in sorting through all of it. We've also learned that automation can discriminate and can make problems for us, so we have to be careful with that. But where do we advertise? Do we know that there's some sort of group for something? If we need an accountant, there's an accountants association in the state. They've got a job board. That's a great place to put that. If we work in the not-for-profit world, we go to the Montana Not-for-Profit Association. We put our job up on their job board, and we put it on Indeed or somewhere else to get it out there to everyone. We have to sell our job too. So we need to put salary ranges on job postings. There didn't used to be, we didn't talk about money until the end of the interview. Maybe it used to be considered bad form to ask in an interview what a job paid. Now you should know what a job pays. You should know what it pays, the range that it pays, before you put the application in, because let's not waste each other's time. Truly, if you don't know what a job pays and you are a younger generation, you are going to skip that particular job posting. They just don't get the eyeballs on them anymore. Folks assume that it pays low because that's why they didn't put it in the ad. Totally different way of looking at how we recruit employees and how we retain employees. Used to be that you got paid on time and you got paid fairly. You may have some benefits, things like that you could expect. Well, now are we offering flex work? What does your time off look like? How much time can we expect to be able to do the things we want to do as well as get our work done? What kind of flex work do you do? Can I just work remotely? Those are the kind of things that retain people. Having great managers retains people. Having that good culture retains people. There's that thing that says, culture eats everything for lunch. Really true right now. If your culture stinks, people are not going to want to stay with you. We've got some companies that will pay you to come in for a day and see what the workplace, you shadow somebody, see what the workplace looks like, and they'll pay you for that day for coming in to do that. It's kind of like what restaurants do when they looking for an executive chef. They pay them to come in for a night, and they have a special night where that chef, prepares a special menu, and they see if that's somebody that they want to hire. We're looking at candidates to say, do you want to come work for us? It used to be the attitude of that we were doing you a favor offering you a job. We have to lose that attitude. If we're still feeling that way, not true. We want to be a place where people want to come to work and they want to stay with us. Have some upward mobility, have some training, all those things going on. Mentoring opportunities. Got to recruit young people. What are the things that they're looking for that we offer? Those are the kind of things that need to be in our job posting. And those are the kind of things that will also help with our retention. And then training, trainings used to be, if in college, theater style, somebody lecturing to you, no back and forth, no communication, nothing. We know now that if we're training processes, it needs to be short, it needs to be interactive, and people need to be able to use technology to do it, and it needs to be a little more entertaining. One of the companies that I work with is a welding company, and their safety training is sort of like a video game. Brings some fun into the idea of safety, which is an incredibly serious subject, but it also tests them on their knowledge of situations and what they should do in specific situations. And each module is 15 minutes, and they have 5 modules to complete, and they have 5 days to complete those 5 modules. But 15 minutes teaches them 3 things in those 15 minutes. And by the time they're through with that little interactive piece, then they can see what's happening. Thanks, Brian. Have a good day. Then they can, it tracks them. through their safety training. But that's what they've done to make their training more accessible for younger folks, because that's who they're trying to attract more into their workplace. So how has your training changed? If it hasn't, if we're still just lecturing them and not allowing them to participate, ask questions, those sorts of things, we've got to change how we're doing that, especially when we're doing procedure process kind of training. So we talk about what do we expect out of them, realize they have expectations of us too. All of your employees should be able to answer the question, what are your job expectations? When I go into companies to do compensation projects and I sit down with people to work on their job descriptions and I say, what are the major expectations of your job? You have no idea how many blinking faces I get back. Your people should know what's expected of them. What are your expectations? And it's not just of the things they do in their work, but what's the culture like? What do we expect people with behavior? You know, how do we expect people to behave? What do those sorts of things look like? And then expectations of folks. You've got expectations of them. They're also going to have expectations of you. When I'm interviewing people, I used to ask, what kind of expectations do you have for your direct supervisor, your direct manager? What do you need from them? Even if you've never had that conversation with your folks, they have expectations of you. They have expectations of your company. You need to know what those expectations are. If we're not meeting those expectations, we are going to lose employees. And our culture isn't working for folks. Find out what people are looking for. Talk to them. If you're managing others, what are your expectations of me? As your manager, how could I be perfect for you? And then, you know, you can make a joke and say, I'm never going to be perfect, but how can I get close to perfect for you? What do you need? This has been part of the conversation that we've left out. We're talking about retention for employees. For older employees, this is a harder question for them to answer. What is their expectation of us? For younger employees, this is an easier question for them to answer because it's top of mind that they have some expectations. Older employees, it's been in the workplace more about what's expected of them. We're looking to have a more cooperative, collaborative environment. So expectations definitely go both ways. When we're talking. So we got to have that culture of dialogue. Culture of dialogue is terminology that we use when we teach communication classes. It is an environment of trust in your workplace. People have to know that they can bring forward ideas, problems, issues, and that is a safe environment to do so. Ideas are welcome. Feedback is given. Feedback is, you get it, you give it. It's a back and forth situation, but it's safe to talk about it. Your people have to know, if you're supervising them, that if they have a problem with something that's happening from you, that they're safe to tell you about it. When I first started managing folks, I think I was 24 when I got my first store managing people, you know, and I was so excited. Oh, this is going to be so great. First year in, came evaluation time. I gave them an evaluation to do on me. I cried for a couple of days after I got them back because I wasn't perfect. Am thankful to this day that they felt like they could be honest with me about it, which was wonderful. But they were, you know, you're very focused on numbers. Well, I was, you know, I get bonus checks. I was focused on numbers. Sometimes you forget, you know, that we're people. And they were absolutely right. Sometimes it was go, 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 do, do, do. We have to get this done. And I would forget that those are human beings who haven't had any dinner. Yes, they were right. Most of the things that they said, I understood, and I could make changes on those. And some of them were personality issues that, we probably weren't going to solve. And that's okay too. Everybody doesn't have to love everybody, but we do have to get along and work well together. So that's that culture of dialogue and that trust piece. We have to be safe to talk about the things that are good. We have to talk about ideas that we have, and we have to talk about things that aren't going so well. And all of those conversations have to be okay to have. If you're not running an environment where it's okay to do this, younger employees are going to be madly uncomfortable with you. And I mean madly uncomfortable with you. They are definitely not going to want to be part of the environment. Their whole lives have been environments of collaboration and teamwork and being safe in that environment. So if you're not offering that environment, that's going to be problematic for them. So how can we communicate with some generations? So this is a gentleman that I found on YouTube doing tons of generation research, which I'm doing all the time. It's a very hot topic. So I'm working on generation information all the time. His name is Ryan Jenkins. And if you want to search for him on YouTube, please be sure to put in Ryan Jenkins generations. And just trust me on that. That's what you want to put in there. But this is a short video from him about communicating across generations.
In this video, you'll learn the silver bullet on how best to communicate across generations. Workplace communications today are a tangled web of varying preferences. Some call, some email, and others will text while sitting right next to you. Evolving technologies have wreaked havoc on our communication choices. There has never been a greater divide between preferred communication channels than there is today. When is face-to-face better than a call? Or when is text better than an email? Or when is Slack better than Skype? The way people communicate varies by generation. According to Gallup, sending and receiving text messages is the most prevalent form of communication for Americans younger than 50. More than 2/3 of 18 to 29-year-olds say they sent and received text messages a lot the previous day, as did nearly half of Americans between 30 and 49. Young Americans are also well above average in their use of email and social media on a daily basis. Recent research shows similar trends, with emailing and calling increasing with age and texting decreasing with age. The data is clear that the younger the individual, the more likely they are to communicate using newer technologies. With such disparity, how are you to find communication cohesion in today's multi-generational workplace? The answer? Defer. Consider the communication preference of the individual you wish to communicate with and defer to their likely communication preference. We often communicate with others how we prefer to be communicated with, but the countless options for communication that now exist are forcing us to be adaptive. Since age has a strong correlation with an individual's communication preference, it's useful to use generations as a clue to what form of communication would be most efficient and impactful. For example, if a millennial employee was interested in getting in touch with a baby boomer, the millennial should consider deferring to a phone call or a face-to-face meeting. Or if that baby boomer manager wanted to get in touch with the millennial employee, deferring to a text or instant messaging may prove most effective. Certainly not a phone call. Once the connection is made, ask how the individual would prefer to communicate moving forward, and then continuously defer to that method of communication. Adjusting our communications for each generation can be exhausting, but it's a new reality we face in today's 21st century workplace. What's more exhausting is the constant miscommunication that occurs when you try to communicate with everyone based on the specific communication preference. This simple strategy will also help generations become more versed in communication skills where they lack. Millennials can become stronger offline communicators, and older generations can become stronger digital communicators. Considering one's generation, while not fail-proof, can be a quick and effective way for deciding which communication method to use. If you don't know the generation of the individual you're going to communicate with, default to email. While texting is the dominant communication function on mobile, it can be too personal for a first communication. Email, at the moment, is the most generational neutral form of communication. After having a front row seat to today's communication challenges, I anticipate Generation Z, the post-millennial generation, will begin to finally streamline the workplace communications as they come of age. But until then, prefer to defer.
Good leadership. Yep, absolutely. Your paycheck, it is important. So we're talking about this communication and how we communicate with each other, and that defer piece where, email, most neutral way to communicate, for all of us. There are preferences among generations about how we communicate. When we're having problems or having issues communicating, there's a little meeting model that you can use, and we want to make time to discuss, explore the differences, why we're seeing it differently, or why we may be having an issue with one another communicating, encourage respect. Everybody comes from a different place with things, and our generational differences can be the reason we're having problems communicating, but we have to respect each other on that. And then take responsibility for making it better, for making that work for the two of you. So we're talking about this model. We make time to discuss. So anytime we're going to have a meeting, we need to make sure that it's in a good time and place. We have to have long enough, to discuss what's happening and what's going on. Timeliness is key. As soon as you have a difficulty communicating with someone that might be generational in origin, then as soon as that happens, we want to talk about it. Let the other person know that you want to discuss that communication issue, and you want to get that straightened out, want to clear the air on some things. We have to be respectful and courteous in our tone when doing this, because we've already had an issue communicating. If we come in with, well, you treat me like this, and then I do that, not helpful. It's helpful to say, it hurts my feelings when I hear X, Y, or Z, or it makes me take a step back, or I lose trust, something like that. So we can explain to them how that affects us. What's the ripple effect of that on us? But not in a blaming, it's you, kind of way. Let's do this in a respectful way. What are the differences that you have that's happening? Talk about yourself, not the other person. Talk about what you're looking to avoid, and be specific about what you need and what's not working for you. If someone constantly calls you and that is the most irritating and annoying thing in the world for you, it is okay to say, you know what, I am so much more likely to answer a text, or so much more likely to answer a chat, or if you want to set up a meeting, send me an invite. But the phone calls, at some point during the day, things just go to my voicemail. So if you need me, there's better ways to communicate than a phone call, because I want to make sure I'm available to you when you need me. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for to be able to solve with this. Encourage respect amongst the two of you. From their perspective, phone calls might be the best and easiest way to get a hold of someone. For you, it might be the most intrusive thing in the world. So we need to understand that from each other. And if they say, well, you know what, when I need to talk to somebody, I call them. Say, you know what, I get that, but I'm the kind of person that when the phone is interrupting me, I turn it on voicemail. So if you need me and you don't want to go to my voicemail, here's the best thing to do. And, it's not disrespecting that person that they feel the phone call is the way to get a hold of you. Explaining to them why it's not. And remember, we're separating people from problems always. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Somebody's upset with us because they can't get a hold of us. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. And telling them how to get a hold of us is the solution for that problem. And let them know, say, hey, I get it. A lot of people, phones are the fastest, easiest way to go, or there might be other people in the workplace that, that's the best way to get a hold of them, but not the best way to get a hold of me. And remind them, I'm here to help. I want to be there for you. I don't want you to go to voicemail and get frustrated. Here's the way to do this. And then take responsibility for what's happening. You want to make it right. Let them know you want to make it right. Let them know that you understand where they're coming from and what they need from you. Reach some agreement there. In this scenario that I'm giving you, they need to agree that they'll either set up a meeting with you, or they will chat you, or they will text you. They need to do one of those things if they need you right away. If they don't, they can call, they can leave a voicemail, and you'll get back to them when you can. Make sure you end it on a positive note. I want to be there for you. I want to be there to help. I want to be there to answer your questions. You know how to get a hold of me. Have a laugh, make sure everybody's on a good foot, and then follow up with them. If they call you again, when you check your voicemail, if they say, I need you to da 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 da, I would chat them back and say, hey, I just got your voicemail. How far behind are we on that, from the phone call? Not accusing them, but saying, how far behind are we because we got a phone call? And you're using a method of communication that you want them to use. So that's a way to put some meat behind what you're saying, is you're communicating with them in the way you want them to communicate with you. Follow up with them again. Make sure things are going okay. If they start leaving you chats and messages and things like that, thank them for it. And that's a huge piece, and it really should be on the bottom of this. And I should put that on there. When people get it right, say thank you for getting it right. Everybody appreciates being recognized that they're making an effort. So if we go through all of this process and we do our meat steps and we feel like we're on the right foot and we get it right moving forward, say thank you to that other person. There can be major problems in communication based on generations. IT folks that I work with, pretty loosey-goosey about when they work. It might be 3 o'clock in the morning when they're up, doing something. They're up coding, they're up changing something in a system, they're up fixing a problem, because that's when they prefer to work. Well, then they're not available during the workday if you have a problem. But there is a way to get a hold of them. So you get a hold of them when you can. And sometimes we're going back and forth on chat, next day to next day to next day. But you could also say, hey, listen, I'll be in at 8 o'clock in the morning. Will you be around then so we can get this settled? And they'll catch on that, okay, yeah, we've been going back and forth. Yeah, I'll be there at 8. Or they could say, you know what, I'm going to start at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. Are you going to be around? Make those kinds of leeway for each other. Bend and meet the other person. Sometimes it's better to call somebody that prefers the phone call. If you're a person who prefers a phone call and you're dealing with somebody who hates the phone, don't call them. Make sure we're dealing with each other in the way that works best. So we're talking about how people communicate, that older generation, formal communication, letters or face-to-face. That's what we're looking at. With boomers, telephone. Face-to-face is preferred. Might telephone and email. Email, they're all familiar with email, so email works. But they are going to reach for the telephone first before they do anything else. Then our Gen Xers, you know, if you call me, you would think I don't exist. Text messages have been one of the best things that ever happened to those of us in Gen X. Emails are fine. Text messages are wonderful. We do have a chat that we use on Teams for my folks that I work with, and that's a great way that we use to communicate with one another. Gen Y, those are millennials. Text, social media works. They're going to be online using mobile devices. You're going to see that with Gen X as well. Gen Z, we're seeing more handheld devices. There is a subset in Gen Z that are buying dumb phones. They're buying phones that all they can do is text with, that don't have other internet capabilities, which I think is really interesting. And it's aimed at limiting social media time for themselves. So there's an awareness, you know, that social media can not be a helpful tool sometimes. But this is a generation too that is using FaceTime. The uptick in FaceTime use is huge. And that is being attributed to younger folks being on FaceTime. It's certainly not Gen X, because Lord, don't FaceTime me. Millennials, okay. Use it with my mom sometimes to chat with her face to face. But we're seeing younger generations do more face-to-face communicating. So how do we use all these things to our advantage? We look at all the generations that we have in the workplace. We look at everything that's going on in the workplace. What's our advantage in that? When you're supervising or managing other people, you're challenged with using your workforce effectively. And one of the ways that you do that is look at everybody that's in your group and what are their gifts? What are the best things about these folks? What do they bring to the table as their absolute strengths? If you're putting me and my colleagues around a table, you're going to put my friend Ryan in charge of the numbers and the spreadsheets. He loves it and he's great at it. You're going to put my friend Jessa in charge of processes and policies, things like that. She writes amazing policies. She's very good at it. She enjoys doing it. You're going to take me and Brian and Amy, and you're going to put us in training, because we enjoy training and we enjoy dealing with others. You're going to take me and put me in any sort of networking event. You're going to take Amy and put her also in any sort of networking event or in any sales kind of capacity, because she's great at that. And then Brian, who's a trainer, is also the manager of us all. But that is using all of our strengths to the best that we have. Now, do I have to do some compensation numbers work? Sure. Do I have to do some writing policies, things like that? Sure. But is it the majority of my time? No, because Brian looks at each of us and says, what's their gift? What's the thing they bring to the table? And that's the thing that we're pushed to do in our work. So when we're thinking about the different generations, what are the gifts that they have? What do they bring? So if you still have some traditionalists in your workplace, well, you talk about been there, done that, seen that, got the t-shirt, they are the generation that's have all that. They've got real practical experience. They've seen a lot of change. They've seen things work and they've seen things really flop. They're also good for making business cases for why we should do something, because they're looking at it from that business viewpoint. They're not necessarily looking at it from a people management or sensitivity to people viewpoint. They're looking at the business case for it. And they're going to be able to help you with senior management because they've been working with that for a long time. They probably know senior management pretty well. So they've got that institutional knowledge that can help. Then we've got our boomers. They're going to be politically savvy in the workplace, because workplaces do have a little politics going on. They're going to know how to navigate that. They also understand the informal organization. I worked as a buyer for a group of resorts, and the general manager of those resorts was a great guy if you wanted to buy a used Jaguar vehicle, because those were his hobby and he knew a lot about them. But if you needed fixtures or anything like that, he was just not the person to ask to get the buy-in or sign off from that. The person to ask was the woman who was the vice president of sales. Now, should any of that have been her job? Absolutely not. But she was the informal general manager of the organization. And if you needed something, that's who you went to. And when I first went to work there, the director that we put me in charge with, she said, you know, if you need anything, you ask Ursula. So that was that boomer knowing the informal part of the organization. Boomers also have networked. They build relationships with people outside the organization that do the same kind of work, and they build relationships with people within the organization. So a lot of times these are great people to have someone on their first week spend some time with, because they can tell them the ins and outs of things that might not be in your employee handbook. They can help them navigate the company. And then Gen Xers, going to ask a lot of questions. Going to be skeptical about whether things will work or not. Going to be skeptical about whether you've thought it through and how it's going to affect everyone. So we're going to challenge assumptions. We're going to challenge status quo. Gen X is really good with change. We've seen a lot of change in the workplace in our working time. But looking at that change, we're going to be asking questions about it. Who's it going to affect? How much is it going to cost? When could we implement it? Does it really help us? What's it really going to do for us? You know, if it saves us one step, is that really that important? If it saves us 5 steps, why didn't we do it 10 years ago? That's going to be your Gen Xers asking those questions. A good reality check for the company, and folks who are looking at what we've always done and saying, there's something new and better out there. Why are we hanging on to what we've always done? So your Gen X are going to be the folks that if you want to examine something, they're the ones that are always examining. Then your millennials, of course, bridge those tech gaps. If you're of a certain age, then you know you are your parents' technology people. That's just how it goes. I'm a Mac person, and my mom keeps buying PCs, and I keep telling her, you know, you keep doing that, I can't help you. That's what we are. That's what happens. And in the workplace, we have to see that as a gift, and we have to reward that. If we're asking people to constantly help people catch up with technology, there needs to be some sort of reward for that, because it can get a little annoying to always be the tech help for people. But millennials can bridge those gaps that you have. Use millennials to identify emerging trends, timely solutions. Millennials are really good at looking forward 5 years, 10 years. A thoughtful generation about that, not looking at the moment, but they do look ahead, which is a terrific part to have on your team. And they are natural collaborators and team workers, because all through their lives, that's what they've been doing. That's what you did in school. That's what you did in your sports. We were teams and good collaborators. The focus wasn't so much on scoring points, but as enjoying the activity and being part of a team. So the focus was a little different. These are going to be folks who are looking at your workplace as a team. So if you're looking at your workplace as departments, they're looking at your workplace as a team. And then we've got our Gen Z folks, some risk takers, but at the same time, looking for some security. We really thought that this was going to be the gig work generation, that they were not going to want to be employed. They were going to be employed on their own and working for different companies. That's what we thought was going to happen. Then COVID hit, and the folks that we see coming out of college past COVID are looking for stable work. They're looking for companies with benefits. They're looking for companies with insurance. It has always been the case that young people aren't interested in your benefits. That's not true anymore. And that's knowledge gained through COVID. The knowledge that companies didn't offer sick time. The knowledge of how many people did not actually have insurance, the knowledge that how bad insurance was for some people. All of that really, rose to the surface for young people during COVID. They were seeing it happen at home. They were seeing it happen to their friends. They were seeing it happen to their friends' families. It all became very real. So they're looking for stability in their workplace. They're also looking for advancement in their workplace. They are creative, they are entrepreneurial about things, but we're seeing them wanting to be more long-term. This is also the generation that uses social media as a tool. If they want to learn how to do something, TikTok is just as useful as YouTube. And even though Montana has passed their TikTok law, you can still get on TikTok. But they see social media as a tool for things. It's not just keeping up with your family and chit-chatting for your friends. If you want to learn something about, how a different culture is using technology, or how a different company who is in the same business as you is utilizing new technologies, you can find out information on social media. You can put it out there that you're looking for somebody that works for X company to ask some questions. It gets shared around. Somebody from X company contacts you. Wow, how does that work? That's how they use social media. It's not just a chit chat. It's not just, taking pictures of food, those sorts of things. They really are looking at social media as a place for answers. And they get some amazing answers from things on social media. It's pretty crazy. So again, let's take another little look at these generations here. So those boomers, face-to-face communication, working on digital technology. My mom is a prolific texter. Embracing more kinds of technology. She's got her Fitbit, she's got an iPad, she's got her Android phone, she's 81, but she has all of those things. Starting to embrace it more in the workplace as well. That was hard at first, but who doesn't have some sort of computer at their desk now? For social media preferences, Facebook, for sure. LinkedIn, because it is more business oriented. Then our Gen Xers, please email us. Please don't call us. We're okay if you text us as well. Comfortable with technology. It's been around since we were kids, and we've watched this crazy evolution happen. So very comfortable with technology. And for social media preferences, Facebook and Twitter. And I can say for me that it's Twitter and TikTok. I don't really enjoy Facebook, but that is how I do keep up with some of the older members of my family, is through Facebook. But Twitter, yeah, me and Twitter have a problem. Then millennials prefer email or text. Digitally native generation, first ones. The technology that we have today was around when they were born. Has it gotten better? Has it gotten more streamlined? Yes, but it's always been around for them. Social media preferences, not loyal to anything in particular. They use what's new, or they use what's useful. So they don't necessarily have a go-to. Then for those in that Generation Z, they like those written communications, but in-person meetings are as important. And again, we're seeing a bounce back from some things that happened from COVID, where people went to work for a company during COVID, and never met their boss in person. So they're looking for some more of that in-person contact. They're going to expect quick responses because they're texting or they're on your company chat. So they're looking for some quick responses for things. The Gen Zer that we have in our workplace, you get a chat from him, and he's waiting for you to chat him back. So you have to say, I'll get back to you this afternoon, or I have trainings today, I'm going to have to get back to you tomorrow. He's fine with that because you've told him, I can't have this conversation right now. So he's good. He knows when you will. And those social media preferences, we got Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok's still hanging in there, as prevalent as Snapchat. And again, things that are coming up that are new, the younger generations are going to be interested in new things that are happening and how they can use those in the workplace. So for working together, our generations getting it together, working together, doing great with one another, we have to recognize that there are differences and they influence our ideas, the expectations we have of each other, our values, how you behave at work. We have to recognize that that's true and it's different. Acknowledge that everybody wants to be treated with respect. The idea that somebody's a newbie, somebody's fresh out of college, and we don't have to treat them with the same respect that we treat somebody who's been there for 10 or 15 years. We treat people with respect. They got hired onto our workplace for a reason. You should treat them with respect no matter what. Know that you're going to have different life experiences and you can learn from that. We absolutely can learn from someone who's been there, done that. Absolutely. We can also learn from someone who has fresh eyes and fresh perspective. So it works both ways. If you are a micromanager, you're just going to have to stop. Young people will not be micromanaged. And that kind of starts with your Gen Xers because we bristle at that as well. But it is absolutely not the way to bring younger people into your workplace. If you're looking over their shoulder, from their perspective, you don't trust them. That's what you're telling them. Then we have to foster creativity and communication. If it's not kind of natural in our organization, we're going to have to get better at inviting it in. Younger people are going to communicate with you more. Over communication has been what they've been raised with. So they're going to over communicate with you. And they're looking for responses back, looking for answers, looking for mentorship. They're looking for help. They want to come up with new things. They want to see if there's a better way. If there's not, there's not. And they're okay with that. But you can't shut down an idea just because. And then we have to find the things that we share, our common ground. When you work for not-for-profits, your common ground is really obvious. It's whatever your mission is. If you work in healthcare, at the end of the line, your common ground is patience. How we're helping people, how we're helping people live well. That's our bottom line on that. So what do we share in that? What's the common ground that we've got? Be flexible in how you interact and treat others. If you especially are going to manage others, you got to be flexible in how you're dealing with people. It shouldn't be that everybody has to adjust to you. If we know that somebody hates a phone call, why would you call them? What would be the purpose of it? Text them or email them. Be flexible in how you do things. And be proactive in dealing with conflict and letting people know what bothers you. We had a company that they had to make rules on their company Slack about gifts and things like that because people would get a joke going. And then for the next 10 minutes, the company Slack is just going off with jokes and gifts. And there's people trying to get work done. They're not really appreciating that. And they had a question for somebody way up in the Slack, and they're probably not going to see that. So they had to make a few rules about how that works. So if something's not working, we have to be willing to speak up about it. And we have to focus on what really matters in the situation. And when we're at work, what really matters is that we're getting the work done. We're being productive. That's what really matters. We have to focus on teamwork, working well together, getting along. We don't have to be buddies. We don't have to be friends, but we do need to recognize each other's gifts and get along well at work. And then we have to focus also on whoever our customer is, whoever that might be in our work relationships. Challenge your assumptions and raise awareness. And I would really ask you to challenge any sort of thoughts you have about all of this generation behave this way. All of this generation behave that way. All of this generation are this. They're not. And remember, we're dealing with individual people. Now, can it be a hallmark of a generation? Maybe, but is that person that way? We're dealing with individuals. And remember, please, our workplaces need to be secure places for folks. People need to feel secure in their job. They need to know that their job is going to be there tomorrow. They also need to know when they're performing well and when they're not, so we can help them if they need help. They need to know that it's a place that they can raise their hand and say, this is a problem. This is wrong. I've got an issue here, and that it's okay to do that. And then we have the, unfortunately, the physical security issues of a workplace. So we need to think about that too. How are we keeping our folks physically safe? So this is one of my favorite little infographics that I found. And this is talking about how much better we are in making decisions, the more inclusive we are. So the average of a team is 66%. That's your average. So 66% of the time, a team makes a good decision. If it's all male, then 58% of the time, it's a good decision. So when do we get better in our decision making? When we have some gender diversity. So people of different age groups. 73% of the time, we make a better decision. It goes up to 80 when we've got age and gender diversity. Sorry, I said that wrong in the last one. When we gender diversity, we're at 73%. We throw age groups into that, we go up to 80%. We go all the way up to 87% when we have age, gender, and geographic diversity. If you are a company that has offices in other places, and you may not necessarily all work together, but you could include some of those folks in a question and answer session when we're talking about making change, we can make better decisions. 87% of the time, when we are the most inclusive, we get better answers to questions. And that's huge. So this really speaks to me with how important it is to see our diversity in generations as a value. Because when we start adding that in, 80% better diversity, age and gender. We're getting better answers to things. We're getting experienced answers. We're getting fresh eyes on things that don't have any baggage attached to it. We're getting all of that information in when we're making a decision. And that is invaluable as far as I can see. So that is the last slide that we have. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything they'd like to talk about? I know you guys have an evaluation to fill out, so would appreciate you doing that. But anybody have anything they want to talk about? If you can come off mute if you want to, or any questions you want to ask. Okay, well, I don't see anybody looking to do that. So I will wish you all a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for being with me this morning.